My real name is Sophie Payton, and I grew up on a farm outside a little town called Canowindra, on a property that my family have lived on for like 120 years. I started playing music, when I was really young. Started writing songs when I was probably 12, and I went away to boarding school in Sydney and, discovered The Sound of White by Missy Higgins and worked my way through it and then tried to write my own version. And then I got into medicine at the University of New South Wales. And so I started studying that, and I, really missed sort of just playing music because I used to do it all the time in high school. And then I, started playing gigs, and soon those kind of weekend gigs turned into overseas tours, and I kept doing my medical degree. And so all of that has kind of brought me to here, which is that I'm working as a doctor in Melbourne. I sort of live these strange dual lives which have never intersected as much as they have this year with the pandemic, because I, was planning on playing music overseas, but instead found myself, with this on every day. I felt a sense of kind of obligation, in that, I have training in this area. From what I'm seeing on the news, they just need sheer numbers of people to work because everyone's getting sick or getting, sent, like getting isolated for 2 weeks. I get a call from the DHHS saying, can you please come back to Melbourne right now? We need people. And I was like, look, I've got, a week's more work here because I'm playing at the Opera House and etc. But I'll get back to Melbourne as soon as I can. So I did, and then was immediately dropped into, the front line. It was a pretty hectic energy. People are always sick in hospitals, so that's nothing new. But I think the sort of risk that, every health worker recognized that if I walk into this patient's room, there's a chance that I will get COVID, and there's a chance that I will take it home with me to my loved ones. My mum is a piano teacher, and I always used to kind of, listen to her play, and I'd sit in the car with my grandma, and we would sing a lot. In many ways, it influenced my, the way that I make music. I think I'm always kind of craving space, in a literal and a figurative sense. And I, whenever I get into a sort of an area with a lot of space, I want to fill it with something. And it really influenced my recent kind of record because I made it in Canowindra, and so walked around with like a field recorder banging gates and starting tractors and utes and stuff. I grew up just listening to the records my mum had, which were sort of James Taylor and Billy Joel and Carole King. And so I think that sort of, remoteness and isolation, you're kind of just left to your own devices. My latest record, reflects how much, where I come from means to me because I actually made it there. So I made it in this little cottage on my parents' farm that was built in like the 1860s. And I just didn't really have that much stuff there. Like I'd got a couple of guys, a couple of friends from the States to come over, and we could only bring so much stuff with us. So we were like, let's only bring things that really spark joy. The meeting of like, beautiful, natural, preserved elements and elements that have been reamped and reprocessed until you kind of don't even know what it is anymore. In this instance of making music, it was so about the story, the lyrics and that kind of content and that journey that we just didn't, I didn't want anything to distract from that. So I tried to, instead of filling the space, I tried to just, preserve it. I think the like sonic things that define me are firstly my voice, just the way it naturally sounds. I think everyone's voices are pretty idiosyncratic. I was given The Sound of White by Missy Higgins for my 12th birthday, and it was like the first record that I had really, connected with my own accord, not just because it was familiar to me, but I remember putting it in our CD player and just sitting there and being like, I've never, ever heard music like this before. As I got into university, I started listening more to, Bon Iver and Al Skier and High as a Kite and, bands and artists that sort of took those kind of folk or poppy songs and then, really manipulated them and kind of, subversed things and I'd never thought about production, you know, like until I was probably 21. Like I just thought about songwriting. I was obsessed with songwriting, and you know, I just thought it was like you wrote the song, you recorded it, and then it just, you know, that was it. But I think probably listening to those artists that, you know, that I just mentioned, that made me kind of very consciously think about, you know, those different processes from writing a song down on a piece of paper to eventually the record coming out. Music, you know, is probably more of an inherent skill that I've worked on throughout my life, whereas medicine is, you know, no one is born knowing how to be a doctor. Both take a lot of hard work in very different ways. But yeah, I think the main thing I've kind of come to as the binding factor is sort of the idea of story. You know, as a listener, you insert yourself into that story, you apply it to your own life. It helps you navigate your own journey. And medicine, you know, you walk into a patient's room in the hospital, or someone comes into the emergency department, and my literal job that I'm being paid to do is sit there and listen to them tell me a story. And, you know, it's a story about what's kind of brought them in today, or what's keeping them in hospital, or what's upsetting them that day. Because around the world we're watching like Spain and Italy and New York like absolutely go to pieces. And I mean, everyone just thought that's what's going to happen here. So I called my old hospital. I said, I'm around if you need casual staff. But I was back in Melbourne with my partner. And then I put my name down in like the DHHS, which is the Victorian Health Service. And it just didn't happen for months. So like Australia got on top of the pandemic. It was pretty inspiring to go into work, and, you know, like people are there literally putting their lives and the lives of their loved ones on the line. Music, on the other hand, where work was literally taken from everybody, like livelihoods just absolutely ruined. And, you know, people have shown their resilience again. They're doing live stream gigs. They're, you know, charging ticket prices for stuff like that to try and keep themselves afloat. You know, the artists I know are writing more music than ever, looking for ways to, you know, make themselves survive this. And I think about the two industries that I'm in, music and medicine, and I don't think there have been two industries more put to the test, you know, for very different reasons. And I don't think there are two industries that people are in that they've had to be more resilient than they have this year. Music is a vehicle for that, for sharing an experience with someone, and that is really what we have missed this year. Whether it's about music or not, you give something to the crowd and they give something back to you, and, you know, and that's what it is. You kind of, that's how I perceive the crowd. I kind of take all the emotion that they're feeling and I kind of absorb it, and that's what gives me energy, and that's what, you know, makes it such a fulfilling thing to do. So yeah, I think, you know, that's what the crowd means to me. And like, I'll go out with, you know, my mates in the music industry, and they just like, they cannot comprehend what my day-to-day must be like in the hospital. And then I speak to my mates at hospital, and they just cannot comprehend what being on a tour must be like, or, you know, playing at a festival, or all those sorts of things. So they do seem worlds apart. You know, we're always fighting for the attention of the government and of politicians, and, you know, reminding them we're an industry that, you know, that matters, that brings in money, that, you know, is an export and an import and employs countless people. You know, we're not sort of a charity that we need to remind you about. But my hope, probably, you know, in a broader sense, is that it gets recognition, and it gets recognition not from, you know, a politician that's minister for roads and arts, that we get our own portfolio, that, you know, it's looked at by the small businesses. Music is a ever-present reminder of how important, you know, not being alone is.